A millionaire's son was crying alone in a lobby, until two janitors' daughters gave him their only teddy bear, and changed everything. Benjamin Hall stood by the towering windows of his penthouse office, the early morning sun washing the city in gold. The streets buzzed far below, but up here, everything was still. His light blue suit, crisp and tailored, reflected the morning light, and his polished shoes barely made a sound on the marble floor. From the outside, Benjamin was the picture of success, a self-made billionaire, CEO of one of the most powerful firms in the country, and a man who commanded rooms without raising his voice. But beneath the pristine surface, there was something heavy, something worn and silent that never quite left his eyes. For years earlier, everything had changed. His wife, Clara, had died during childbirth. Complications, they said. A 1 in a million event. She had been healthy, vibrant, glowing with excitement for motherhood. And then she was gone, leaving behind a newborn boy and a husband paralyzed by grief. Since that day, Benjamin had buried himself in work. His empire grew, his name became even more powerful, but he stopped attending galas, stopped smiling at cameras, and stopped opening his heart. He provided everything his son needed: private doctors, the best nannies, a life of comfort, but there was a distance between them he didn't know how to cross. Oliver was 4 now. A quiet boy with the same ocean blue eyes as his mother and a mess of soft brown curls. He rarely cried, rarely asked for anything. He'd grown up in large rooms with expensive furniture and distant adults who rotated in and out of his care. Benjamin loved him fiercely, but love without time and touch becomes a shadow. And in recent months, the guilt had begun to settle deeper into Benjamin's bones. That particular morning, things were different. Oliver's nanny, a gentle woman named Marlene, had come down with a sudden fever. Benjamin could have called for a replacement, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the way Oliver clung to his leg that morning, or maybe it was the quiet in the apartment that felt too cold. So, for the first time in years, Benjamin made a different choice. He took Oliver with him to the office. The building was sleek and modern, its walls of glass gleaming in the morning light. Employees greeted them with nervous smiles, unused to seeing their stoic boss accompanied by a child. Oliver walked quietly beside his father, his tiny hand wrapped around 2 of Benjamin's fingers. Benjamin led him into the boardroom and gave him a small chair, some drawing paper, and colored pencils. "Just stay here for a bit. I'll be right across the hall," he said. Oliver nodded. The meeting began, the usual rhythm of projections, strategy, reports. But Benjamin's thoughts kept drifting back to the boy in the next room. When the meeting ended, he returned to the boardroom, and found the chair empty. Panic surged. He checked the hallways, the elevators, asked security. No one had seen him. Then someone mentioned the lobby. "We think we saw a little boy near the front desk," a receptionist said, worry in her voice. Benjamin's chest tightened as he rushed toward the lobby, heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. And that was the moment everything truly began to change. Because downstairs, something unexpected was happening. And Benjamin Hall, a man used to controlling everything, was about to witness a moment that would forever rearrange the world he thought he understood. Oliver had wandered down the hallway without a sound, small feet padding over the polished tile floor like a whisper. The building was massive, full of reflective surfaces and unfamiliar faces, but to him it was just a maze, one he was too young to navigate. The boardroom had felt too quiet, too still, too grown up. His father's voice had faded behind the door, and the moment he realized he was alone, curiosity bloomed. He wanted to find something, he didn't know what exactly, maybe a window, maybe a toy, or maybe just someone who would talk to him like he was more than a silent presence in the corner. The elevator doors opened before him like magic, and he stepped in without hesitation. He didn't press a button. He just stood there and waited. When the doors slid open again, he found himself in a new space, wide, tall, and echoing. The lobby. It was quiet, not because it was empty, but because the people in it had learned how to move without making noise. Receptionists typed gently at their desks, security guards stood silently near the entrance, and employees rushed by in stiff suits and determined heels. No one noticed the tiny boy in the blue blazer with wide, frightened eyes. He walked slowly toward the middle of the lobby, looking up at the tall ceiling as if searching for an answer. But the vastness only made him feel smaller. Finally, unsure of what to do or where to go, he sat down. Right there, in the middle of the marble floor, legs tucked under him, arms limp in his lap. That's when the tears came, not loud and dramatic, but slow and warm, like rain that doesn't ask for attention. His lips trembled as he stared at the polished floor. No one had spoken to him. No one had noticed. And in that moment, Oliver felt completely invisible. But not far from where he sat, in a quiet corner near a vending machine and a janitor's closet, two little girls noticed everything. Sophie and Emma were 5, nearly identical, with light blonde ponytails, bright blue eyes, and the kind of sun-kissed skin that came from playing outside even when there was nothing to play with. Their mother, Linda, worked as a janitor in the building. Every now and then, she brought them with her when she couldn't find someone to watch them. The girls knew the rules: stay quiet, stay close, and don't get in anyone's way. They usually passed the time drawing on scrap paper or playing quietly with the one stuffed animal they shared, a small, slightly worn brown teddy bear with a crooked ear and a ribbon that had long since frayed. He didn't have a name, he was simply our bear. They took turns holding him, but neither really cared who had him more. He belonged to both, equally. He was comfort, familiarity, safety. And when Sophie spotted the little boy sitting all alone in the lobby, his face red and his fists wiping tears from his eyes, she gently pulled Emma's sleeve. "He's crying," Sophie whispered. Emma looked up, following her sister's gaze. "He's all alone," she said softly. The two girls stood, still holding the bear between them, and walked slowly across the shiny floor toward the boy. When they reached him, they didn't speak right away. They just sat down on either side of him, their presence quiet and steady, like anchors. Oliver didn't look at them at first. He was too ashamed to be crying, too unsure if these strangers would laugh or scold. But then he heard one of them speak, gently and without fear. "Are you lost?" He nodded. "Do you want us to sit with you?" He shrugged. And then his voice cracked as he whispered, "I don't have anybody." There was a pause. The kind of silence that's too heavy for kids to carry. And then Emma, without a second thought, held out the teddy bear. "Now you do. He can be your friend." Oliver looked at the bear as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. He didn't reach for it at first. His eyes darted between the girls, unsure, overwhelmed. "But, he's yours." Emma shrugged. "Now he's yours too." He took the bear carefully, like it might break, and hugged it to his chest. And something shifted. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. A small, hesitant smile crept across his face. For the first time that day, he didn't feel so small. And that's when Benjamin arrived. Out of breath, his heart pounding, he froze in the doorway of the lobby when he saw the scene before him. His son, sitting cross-legged on the floor, hugging a beat-up teddy bear, flanked by two little girls in mismatched clothes. And smiling. Benjamin didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, watching, his throat tight. There was something painfully beautiful about the moment. The kind of raw kindness that no money could buy. He saw more humanity in those two girls in that 1 minute than he had seen in boardrooms his entire career. One of the girls glanced up and noticed him. She nudged the other, and then they both smiled politely and stood. But Oliver didn't move. He looked up at his father, eyes still red but brighter now, and held the bear a little tighter. "I got a friend," he said softly. Benjamin knelt down beside him, his expensive suit brushing the floor, and pulled him into his arms. "I can see that," he whispered. "And she's a very kind friend." He looked up at the girls, then to the side where their mother stood silently, mop in hand, unsure whether she should apologize for them or thank him. He shook his head gently. "No one's in trouble," he said. "Not today." And in that moment, 3 different worlds, one built of wealth, one of quiet labor, and one of childhood simplicity, collided on the floor of a cold corporate lobby. And none of them would ever be the same again. Linda had watched the entire scene unfold from across the lobby, her heart climbing into her throat the moment she saw her daughters walking toward the boy. She had been mopping near the far glass wall, just trying to stay invisible like she always did, her uniform damp from work and her shoulders tired from a long morning shift. When she saw the little boy sitting alone, crying silently in the middle of the lobby, something told her this was no ordinary child. His clothes were too fine, his shoes too clean, and there was something in the way he cried, controlled, quiet, almost as if he'd been taught not to be loud, even when sad. It reminded her of her own daughters, how they learned to bottle things up when she couldn't afford to be soft. Linda had taken just one step toward them when she saw her twins move first. Her feet stopped. Sophie and Emma walked over and sat beside the boy without hesitation. Linda's instinct was to rush over, scold them for bothering someone, for interrupting, for being too forward, too seen. But something told her to wait. She knew her daughters. They were careful, kind, and wise beyond their years. Still, when she saw Emma hand him their only teddy bear, she felt her breath catch. That bear was everything to them, shared across 5 birthdays, countless nights, hospital visits, and lonely days waiting for their mother to finish a shift. It wasn't just a toy. It was part of their little world. But when the boy hugged it like it was the first warm thing he'd ever held, Linda felt tears sting her eyes. She didn't cry often. She didn't have time to cry. But something about that moment undid her. And then the elevator doors opened and out stepped a man in a light blue suit. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an unmistakable aura of authority, Linda recognized him instantly. Benjamin Hall. She'd seen him once from afar, walking briskly through the executive floor with a group of assistants. He wasn't the kind of man anyone like her spoke to, not because he was cruel, but because he lived in another world entirely. And now here he was, rushing through the lobby like a storm, his expression frantic, until it changed. Linda watched his face as he saw the children. His whole body seemed to pause. The fear in his eyes softened into something else, something complicated and hard to define. Pride, maybe. Gratitude. Maybe even guilt. He didn't interrupt them. He didn't bark out commands or scold anyone. He simply watched, then knelt down and pulled his son into his arms. She knew then that the little boy was his. She thought that would be the end of it, that he'd thank them, take his son, and disappear back into his elevator, never to speak to them again. But instead, he stood and walked toward her. His presence up close was overwhelming. He was taller than she expected, his suit perfect, his scent expensive but not overpowering. Still, he looked tired. Not physically, but in his soul. And when he spoke, his voice was soft, not what she imagined from someone who commanded empires. "Are those your daughters?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied, straightening automatically, already bracing for a reprimand. "They gave my son their teddy bear," he said, almost like he couldn't believe it. She nodded. "They share it. It's the only one they have." He looked down at the twins, who had returned to sit quietly near the vending machine, now without their bear but still smiling, still watching the boy. Then he turned back to her. "That's remarkable." Linda didn't know what to say. She'd been spoken to by managers, by floor supervisors, but never like this. "I'd like to thank them properly," he continued. "And you, too." "There's no need, sir," she replied, her voice firm. "They did what they felt was right. I didn't tell them to." "I know," he said. "That's what makes it mean more." He asked for her name, then crouched again beside the children. "Hi," he said to the girls. "I'm Oliver's dad." Sophie smiled. "We figured." He chuckled. "Thank you for helping him." Emma simply shrugged. He needed a friend. Benjamin glanced at the empty arms that once held the bear. "And you gave him yours." "It's okay," she said, her voice light. "We can share again later." He stood up, shaken in a way that felt unfamiliar. In his world, gratitude usually came with contracts, rewards, perks. But nothing he could offer would equal the purity of what had happened here. He knew it. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't try to control the situation. He simply accepted the lesson. He turned to Linda one more time. "Would you allow me to take you and the girls to lunch? Just something small. I'd like to thank them properly." Linda hesitated. Her shift wasn't over, and she didn't know if she could accept. But the girls looked up at her with hopeful eyes, and she knew this might be a moment they'd remember forever. "I can take a break," she said finally. "Good," Benjamin said, smiling. "Then let's go." He held Oliver's hand as they walked together toward the small cafe inside the building, the girls bouncing on either side of their mother, their voices already asking if they had chocolate cake or fries or juice with the little umbrellas. Linda laughed for the first time in weeks. Not just politely, but with real joy. Benjamin held the elevator door for all of them, and as it closed, he realized something. This simple moment, a hallway, a bear, a shared meal, meant more to him than any merger he'd closed in the past year. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone at the top. He felt human. They sat together at a corner table in the small cafe tucked into the first floor of the corporate tower, surrounded by the muted hum of espresso machines and quiet conversation. It was an ordinary place where executives grabbed coffee on the go and assistants met for quick lunches, but in that moment, it felt like the safest room in the world. Linda sat across from Benjamin, still wearing her janitor's uniform with the faint scent of bleach clinging to her sleeves. Her daughters, Sophie and Emma, flanked Oliver, who held the teddy bear close to his chest even while sipping apple juice through a straw. The table, covered in crayons and napkin drawings, looked more like a preschool art class than a business setting, and Benjamin didn't mind in the slightest. He watched the children interact with something approaching awe. Oliver, who usually kept to himself even around familiar adults, had completely opened up. He was talking, laughing, showing the girls how the bear had a tiny tear on its ear, which they giggled at and promised to fix later. There was a light in his eyes that Benjamin hadn't seen since Clara was alive, and watching it return, slowly, gently, was like watching winter melt from his son's face. He hadn't known how much Oliver needed other children. He hadn't realized how much he had underestimated the quiet ache of loneliness that lived in the spaces between appointments and meetings, in the hours filled with silence and luxury but no company. Linda, still slightly uneasy in the presence of someone like Benjamin Hall, tried not to fidget with her sleeves. She was used to being invisible, to entering rooms just to clean them, not to be invited to sit in them. Yet he treated her like an equal, not once speaking down to her or pretending kindness. It didn't feel like pity, it felt like sincerity, and that made her even more cautious. She had lived long enough to know how quickly kindness from powerful people could turn into something transactional. But this man, there was grief in him. She recognized it. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the buried kind that settled in the eyes and only surfaced when no one was watching. "You have good girls," he said softly between bites of a turkey sandwich, breaking the silence that had settled between them for a few minutes. Linda smiled. "They've had to grow up early. We don't have much, but I try to teach them that kindness costs nothing." "It's rare," Benjamin said. especially when it comes from those who don't have much to give. Maybe, she replied, looking over at them. Or maybe it's easier to be generous when you understand what it feels like to be without. He nodded, quietly humbled. The conversation shifted. Benjamin asked about her life, where she was from, how long she'd worked here, how she managed to raise twins on a janitor's salary. She answered honestly, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with quiet resignation. She never complained. She simply told the truth. And he found himself listening more intently than he had in years. He wasn't gathering data or assessing her value to the company. He was just listening. At one point, Emma tugged on Linda's sleeve and asked if they could give Oliver a new name for the bear. Since he's part of our family now, she explained. Linda looked at Benjamin, unsure how he'd react. But he smiled and leaned down. What kind of name? Sophie grinned. Teddy Oliver. The table laughed. As the lunch drew to a close, Benjamin found himself dreading the moment they'd all return to their respective places, he to the top floor, Linda to the janitor's closet, and the kids to their separate lives. It felt wrong to let this warmth dissolve. So before anyone could stand up, he cleared his throat and said, "I'd like to do something." Linda blinked. "What do you mean?" "I don't want this to be the last time they see each other. Oliver, he's never connected to anyone like this before. And your girls, they've shown more heart in an hour than some people show in a lifetime." She tilted her head. "You want them to keep playing?" "I'd like to help however I can. Maybe after-school activities, or a place where they can spend time together safely. And you, I know you work long shifts. I could arrange something more flexible for you, if you'd allow it. Not because I pity you, but because I think you deserve more." Linda stared at him, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or argue. "People like us, we don't get offered things like that." "Maybe that's the problem," Benjamin said. "Maybe it's time we start changing that." Her voice caught for a moment. She nodded slowly, overwhelmed but not unwilling. "Okay." The children, unaware of the conversation's weight, continued coloring napkins and giggling about silly stories they were inventing. And Benjamin watched them, heart full in a way he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't business. It wasn't charity. It was something he couldn't yet name, but it felt like the beginning of something real. When they finally stood to leave, Oliver reached for Sophie and Emma's hands, one in each of his. The three of them walked ahead, still talking about the name of the bear, whether or not he needed a little backpack or a scarf. Linda and Benjamin followed in silence, their steps slower, heavier with thought. Neither of them knew exactly what would come next, but both understood something had shifted, permanently. And back in the lobby, as the sunlight poured through the tall glass, the echo of children's laughter lingered in the air longer than it should have. That evening, after the office lights had dimmed and most of the building had emptied, Benjamin sat alone in his office, the city glowing like a sea of stars outside his window. He couldn't focus on the emails piling up in his inbox or the notifications buzzing quietly on his phone. His mind kept drifting back to the cafe, to the way Oliver had laughed without hesitation, to the warmth in the twins' eyes when they shared their only treasure, to the steadiness in Linda's voice when she spoke about raising two girls on her own. It was unlike anything he'd experienced in years, not at a gala, not in a boardroom, not even on the rare occasions when he allowed himself to pause. What had started as a day of inconvenience, bringing Oliver to work because of a sick nanny, had turned into something strangely monumental. It felt like a door had cracked open, and behind it was something he hadn't even realized he was missing. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out an old photo of Clara, taken just days before she went into labor. She was smiling, standing barefoot in their kitchen, holding her belly and laughing at something he no longer remembered. He stared at her face and whispered, "He made friends today, Clara. Real ones." His throat tightened. They gave him a bear. Just gave it to him. It was all they had, and they gave it away like it was nothing. He closed his eyes for a long moment, letting the weight of the memory settle. The next morning, he didn't go straight into meetings. Instead, he walked down to the operations floor and asked for the janitorial staff schedule. It surprised more than a few people. When he explained that he wanted to speak with Linda personally, some stared at him like he had lost his mind. But he didn't care. When he found her pushing a cleaning cart in the east corridor, she looked up, startled, not sure if she should hide or salute. "Morning," he said with a calm nod. "Sir," she replied, instinctively stepping aside. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. I just wanted to talk for a minute. Not about work. About yesterday." She relaxed slightly, but kept her hands on the cart. "Okay. I meant what I said. I want to do more. For your girls. For you. I've been thinking, what if we created a children's lounge in the building? Somewhere safe and bright, where kids could come after school while their parents finish work." Linda blinked. "You'd do that?" "I'd fund it. And I'd ask for your help designing it." "Me? You know what these kids need better than anyone here. You've raised yours with more strength and heart than most people I know. I want you to help lead it." She looked stunned, not from the offer itself, but from the way he spoke it. Like he truly meant it. Like he wasn't trying to tick a box on some corporate social responsibility checklist. "But I'm not qualified," she said, her voice almost apologetic. "You're more than qualified. You're a mother. You're resilient. And I trust you." It was the first time in years someone had said they trusted her. She felt the words like a physical thing, solid and real in her hands. She gave a small nod. "Okay. I'll do it. If it helps other families too." "It will." Later that week, Benjamin hosted an impromptu meeting with his executive team, introducing the concept of a new program, an in-office children's center for employees who had no access to flexible childcare. Some of the room raised eyebrows, others exchanged skeptical glances. But Benjamin didn't argue or debate. He simply told them about what he'd witnessed, about a lost boy, two kind strangers, and a teddy bear that changed everything. He ended the meeting by saying, "We build companies here. But maybe it's time we build something more human, too." The vote was unanimous. Construction began quietly, starting with converting an unused lounge space on the third floor. Linda, now officially employed as the project coordinator, worked with designers to make sure the room had everything the kids might need: bright colors, books, soft rugs, play areas, and cozy reading corners. She made sure nothing felt too clinical, too polished. It needed to feel like home. Meanwhile, Oliver asked every day if he could see Teddy's friends. Benjamin started arranging weekly playdates, sometimes in the office, sometimes in nearby parks. The children grew close quickly, falling into a natural rhythm. They played, they invented stories, they shared snacks. And every time they met, Oliver handed back the teddy bear with both hands and said, "It's your turn to keep him safe." And each time, Sophie or Emma answered, "We all keep him safe. Together." One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the city turned gold again, Benjamin watched the children from a bench near the playground. He sat beside Linda, who had just finished a long shift organizing supplies for the center. Her hair was pulled back, her hands still smelling faintly of lemon cleaner, but her smile was light. "They're different now," she said quietly. "Happier. Stronger." "So am I," he admitted. They sat in silence for a while, watching the kids chase each other across the grass. And in that stillness, Benjamin realized that what he was building now, what they were all building, was more than a center or a program. It was trust. It was kindness. It was something no merger or profit margin could ever measure. It was a foundation for something lasting. Something real. Months passed, and the quiet miracle that had begun with a lost child and a teddy bear continued to ripple outward through the walls of the once sterile corporate tower. What started as a simple act of kindness grew into a transformation none of them had expected. The third floor, once a forgotten lounge rarely used by anyone but interns looking for a quiet break, was now a space full of color, light, and laughter. The newly built children's center had become a heartbeat within the cold, calculated rhythm of the office, and it changed more than just routines. It changed people. Employees who used to avoid eye contact with janitorial staff now greeted Linda by name. Executives passed by the open glass windows of the center and paused, sometimes with coffee in hand, watching as their own children colored next to others, no uniforms or status to separate them. The barriers of status, one so deeply embedded in the daily fabric of the building, began to loosen, not because of policy or memos, but because people had seen something purer than ambition. They had seen children share what little they had. They had seen their CEO sit on the floor with crayons in his suit pocket. Linda stepped into her new role with grace and instinct, although the imposter syndrome crept in from time to time. She still found herself over-apologizing in meetings or second-guessing her opinions, but Benjamin never allowed that self-doubt to linger for long. He reminded her, without ever needing to raise his voice, that her voice mattered. She chose every detail of the center, from the soft bean bags to the shelf of second-hand books she sourced herself. She made sure the art on the walls wasn't just generic prints but drawings made by the children who played there. Each corner of the room was layered with intention. This wasn't a daycare. It was a sanctuary. Oliver flourished. The little boy who once spoke in whispers and hugged the edges of rooms had begun to walk boldly, speak confidently, and laugh without hesitation. He still carried Teddy Oliver most days, even though he no longer clung to him for security. The bear had become more of a symbol now, a reminder of that moment when love and kindness had found him in the middle of a marble lobby. His bond with Sophie and Emma deepened. They were no longer the girls who helped him. They were his sisters in spirit, in mischief, and in imagination. The three of them were inseparable. Benjamin, too, was different. He found himself seeking out moments with people he had once overlooked. He asked the name of every receptionist. He held the elevator for interns. He walked the building not with an entourage, but often with Oliver's small hand in his. His schedule shifted, less time in meetings, more time reading bedtime stories, packing lunches, walking his son to school when he could. The transformation wasn't immediate, and it wasn't perfect. He still had days where the pressure of the business weighed on him like a stone, but even in those moments, he had something to return to. Something that grounded him. One late afternoon, just after a light rain, the children's center held a small gathering for employees and their families. It wasn't extravagant, just cookies, juice, and paper lanterns the kids had made with glitter and glue. Parents sat on foldable chairs, watching their children sing a clumsy but heartfelt song about friendship. When Oliver took the stage with Sophie and Emma, holding hands and swaying slightly out of rhythm, Benjamin felt something crack open inside him. Not a painful break, but a necessary one. A release. After the song ended and the applause faded, he found himself standing near the refreshment table beside Linda. She had flour on her cheek from helping serve cupcakes, and her shoes were still damp from running through puddles to get extra supplies. "You know," Benjamin said, sipping from a paper cup, "when I first walked into this lobby with Oliver that morning, I thought it was going to be one of my worst days." Linda smiled. "It was one of our best." He nodded, eyes scanning the room where employees mingled with janitors, accountants sat next to security guards, and kids ran between legs without knowing or caring what anyone's title was. "It feels different now," he said. "It is different," she replied. "You made space for something bigger than yourself." "No," he corrected gently. "You did." And in that moment, standing side by side in a room that used to be silent but now pulsed with life, neither of them realized just how far they had come, from strangers divided by walls and wages to allies building something far more meaningful than profit. The real success wasn't in the quarterly reports or headlines. It was in the quiet joy of a boy holding a shared teddy bear, in the strength of a mother finally seen, and in the laughter of children who didn't know they had changed an empire simply by being kind. It was a crisp autumn morning when Benjamin arrived at the office carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa and a paper bag filled with warm pastries. The city had already begun to transform with golden leaves skittering along the sidewalks and the wind carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from street vendors. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't outside, it was what had quietly taken root inside the building itself. The headquarters of Hall & Associates no longer felt like just a machine of deadlines and quarterly targets. It had become something warmer, more humane. People smiled more. They lingered longer in common areas, asking each other real questions. The building had a heart now, and Benjamin could trace that change back to one moment, the day Oliver went missing in the lobby and found his first real friends. As he made his way up to the 3rd floor, he stopped by the Children's Center, a now vibrant and lively space full of tiny shoes, laughter, and crayon masterpieces taped proudly to the walls. Linda was already there, crouched down and tying a little boy's shoe, while Sophie and Emma sat nearby reading to a toddler who clearly wasn't following the story but loved the attention. Oliver spotted his dad from across the room and immediately ran up, arms wide, his usual teddy bear flopping under one arm. Benjamin leaned down and caught him, careful not to spill the cocoa. "I brought you your favorite," Benjamin said, handing over the drink with a smile. Oliver lit up. "With marshmallows?" "Extra." They sat together on one of the oversized bean bags, the kind Linda had insisted on because hard chairs didn't make good memories. Benjamin watched as his son took a sip and then leaned comfortably against his side. He marveled at how natural it felt now, these quiet morning moments that used to be so foreign to him. He no longer felt the need to rush towards something more important. He had started to understand that what happened in this room mattered more than any boardroom presentation or contract signing ever could. After a few minutes, Linda walked over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The kids are putting on a little play this afternoon," she said, her voice warm and proud. "They wrote it themselves." Benjamin raised his eyebrows, amused. "Is it about business mergers and strategic acquisitions?" She laughed. "It's about 3 friends who save a lost bear in the forest and become a family." Sounds familiar. They even made costumes. Cardboard crowns, paper wings, glitter everywhere. "You've been warned." "I wouldn't miss it for the world." That afternoon, the entire staff was invited to attend the play. Some came out of curiosity, others out of politeness, but by the end, every single person was completely enchanted. The children's earnest performances, the crooked props, the silly sound effects, it all hit deeper than expected. And when Oliver, wearing a paper crown and a homemade cape, stood on the stage and declared, "Even if you're lost, someone will find you if you're kind," the room erupted in applause. Benjamin sat in the front row, next to Linda and her daughters, clapping harder than anyone. He felt something inside him soften in a way that felt permanent. He had spent years living at a distance from the world, convincing himself that strength meant isolation, that vulnerability was weakness. But now, in a room decorated with glitter and construction paper stars, he felt stronger than he ever had before. After the play, there was a small celebration in the lounge. Employees brought homemade treats, someone set up a speaker to play music, and for a few hours, the company floor looked more like a neighborhood gathering than a global corporation. Benjamin mingled freely, kneeling down to talk to kids, laughing at their stories, accepting a paper flower necklace from Emma as if it were gold. Later in the evening, as people began to leave, Benjamin pulled Linda aside. He told her how proud he was, not just of the center, but of what it represented. It had started as a simple gesture, a thank you for kindness, but it had become a symbol of everything his company could be, a place where people mattered, where families were valued, and where compassion was not only welcomed but necessary. He shared with her something he hadn't told anyone yet. He was drafting a new initiative, one that would formalize the Children's Center model into other branches of the company across the country. He wanted every office, not just the headquarters, to offer the same warmth and support. And he wanted her to lead it. Not as a coordinator this time, but as a director, a full executive position, with a team, a budget, and her name on every policy. Linda was stunned. Her journey from cleaning floors to shaping corporate culture hadn't been part of any plan. She had never asked for recognition, but standing there in the soft glow of string lights and surrounded by the very lives she had helped brighten, she understood something. She hadn't just been surviving, she had been building something. And now she had a chance to build it wider, louder, stronger. With tears in her eyes and pride in her voice, she said yes. As the night wore on and the last of the cupcakes were eaten, Benjamin found himself back in the now empty performance room. He sat in one of the tiny chairs, Oliver asleep in his lap, the bear still tucked close. He looked around at the mess, the glitter, the paper, the scattered crayons, and smiled. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't hollow. It was full of memory. Of change. Of hope. The morning of the company's first official, Family Day, arrived with a kind of anticipation that felt more like a holiday than a corporate event. The once sterile lobby of Hall and Associates had been transformed with balloons, handmade banners created by the children in the center, and tables covered in colorful tablecloths and fresh pastries brought in by employees from their own kitchens. Where sleek neutrality had once defined the space, warmth and community now lived. There were stations set up for face painting, storytelling corners with bean bags, and a small stage near the large windows, where sunlight streamed through and danced on the marble floor. No one could remember the building ever looking or feeling so alive. Benjamin stood near the entrance with Oliver by his side, both wearing matching blue shirts embroidered with the small emblem the children had designed for the center, a bear holding hands with 3 stick-figure kids under a rainbow. Oliver's version of the shirt had smudges of paint on it from helping decorate the night before, but Benjamin refused to change it, saying proudly, "It's part of the story now." Oliver beamed at the attention, holding Teddy close in one arm and gripping his father's hand with the other. As families began to arrive, there was laughter and surprise among employees seeing one another not in suits or uniforms, but as mothers and fathers, aunts and grandparents. People who had worked together for years without ever truly knowing each other now stood together watching their children decorate cupcakes, trade stickers, and perform impromptu puppet shows. The janitorial staff mingled with executives, receptionists played tag with managers' kids, and the hierarchy that once defined every corner of the company quietly melted into the background. Linda arrived just as the event was beginning to swell with energy. She wore a soft yellow dress, simple, elegant, and unlike anything she had worn to the office before. Sophie and Emma ran ahead, their hair tied with matching ribbons, already chasing after Oliver. The 3 of them disappeared into a crowd of giggling kids with no hesitation. Linda spotted Benjamin across the room, and their eyes met for a moment that needed no words. There was a shared recognition of what had been built between them, not just a program or a project, but a space where lives had quietly changed. Benjamin took the stage just before lunch was served. There was no formal podium, no slideshow, no teleprompter. He stood with a microphone in one hand and his son's hand in the other, and when the crowd quieted, he began. "I used to think that building a great company was about numbers, efficiency, performance. And yes, those things matter. But I've learned something I wish I'd known a long time ago, that the real strength of any company is the people who walk through its doors every day. Not just the executives, not just the clients, but the parents, the caregivers, the dreamers. The ones who bring their whole lives to work, not just their titles." He paused, looking down at Oliver who smiled up at him. "This company became better when we stopped separating success from kindness. When we realized that letting children play on the 3rd floor wasn't a distraction from business, it was the best business decision we could make. Because raising happy, connected kids is a legacy that outlasts any contract. There was silence, followed by applause that started slowly but grew until it filled the room. Linda stood near the edge of the crowd, wiping her eyes with the corner of a napkin, overwhelmed not by the speech itself, but by the reality that it wasn't just words. The change was real. She had lived it. Her girls had felt it. Her story, once hidden in the background, was now part of the company's future. As the afternoon rolled on, the air was filled with the kind of joy that came from genuine connection. People danced. Children performed a new skit they'd invented that very morning about a magical building where grown-ups listened to kids. Benjamin laughed more that day than he had in years. He watched Oliver run between games, always circling back to introduce new friends, proudly declaring, "This is my dad," without shame or awkwardness. At one point, as Benjamin and Linda stood together watching the kids paint a giant group mural, she leaned over and asked, "Did you ever imagine it would turn into this?" He shook his head. "Not in a million years." "And yet," she said, "it's exactly what we all needed." In the mural, the children had drawn a city skyline under a rainbow, and in the center, a giant teddy bear with its arms stretched wide. Around it were people, stick figures of all sizes and colors, some in suits, some with mops, all holding hands. No one was at the top. No one was at the bottom. Just people, side by side. By evening, as families began to head home and the cleanup started, Benjamin stayed behind a little longer. He walked the halls with Oliver, the quiet now a comforting hum instead of the lonely echo it used to be. They stopped outside the children's center, where the lights had been dimmed and the room sat still. Oliver turned to him and said, "Can we come here every day?" Benjamin smiled. "As often as you want. Even when I'm big?" "Especially then." That night, as Oliver slept curled against him on the couch, still holding the now slightly more tattered teddy bear, Benjamin stared out the window at the glowing city and reflected on how far they'd come. From marble floors and tearful silences to shared cupcakes and cardboard crowns. He didn't have all the answers. He hadn't magically fixed the world. But he had created a place where healing could happen, where people felt seen, where kindness mattered, and where a little boy had found a home in the arms of strangers who became family. And in that quiet moment, with the weight of the day behind him and the hope of what was ahead, he finally understood that the greatest thing he would ever build wasn't his company. It was this. This life. This connection. This love. This story, at its core, is about how the smallest act of kindness can unravel the strongest walls between people, and build something even stronger in return. What began as a lost boy and a shared teddy bear became a powerful reminder that humanity isn't defined by status, wealth, or roles, but by compassion, empathy, and connection. The ending isn't just happy, it's transformative. It suggests that true leadership doesn't come from power, but from humility. That healing often comes from those we least expect. And that when children lead with love, adults finally remember how to follow. In a world so often divided, this story is a quiet revolution, a beautiful, hopeful blueprint for how we all could choose to live.